Welcome back. Part 2, Day 1, Hispanic Leadership Summit 2020. This is the moment in which we're going to take a deep dive and understand a little better the global picture. What are the Sustainable Development Goals? How do they matter? How do we measure them? What is the progress? What are the best practices that we should learn for our community? Then we're going to go deeper into understanding what are the Sustainable Development Goals seen through the Hispanic lens. What are the areas that really matter and that can be transformative for our community? We're going to have a live debate tonight with the brightest minds of our community debating and understanding what can really be transformative. What are those interventions that will make us leapfrog for the next 10 years? And then we're going to vote. So stay tuned, be part, let's do this.
Welcome to Sustainable Development Goals 101. What are the SDGs all about? We are delighted to bring to you today an incredible panel of people who've been involved in the goals, not only in their creation, but actually in helping to fulfill them. So I'm going to introduce, without further ado, Kate Garvey, the co-founder of Project Everyone, Stuart McLaughlin, Executive Engagement at Google.org, Annemarie, Executive Director of the UN Office for Partnerships. And my name is Edie Lush, and I'm the co-host of the Global GoalsCast, which is part of the We Are All Human Foundation. So let's kick off straight away. Annemarie, first of all, tell me, what is sustainable development and what are the Sustainable Development Goals?
So for me, I really think about sustainable development as a way for us to get to peace, dignity, equality on a healthy planet. And sustainable development are all the pieces of that puzzle that will get us to that equality, the dignity, the peace that we're looking for. Economic development that is really taking climate action, that is really, really not depleting any of our natural resources, that is inclusive, that brings everyone together. And we have 17 goals. And these goals cover everything from poverty to zero hunger. And they really look at all of those basic needs that everyone needs in order to be able to have a world of peace, dignity, and equality for all on a healthy planet.
So it's really interesting that there's 17. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more. In fact, Kate, let's bring you in because you were there at the creation of the goals. Why are there 17? Why do they have different colors? What's the order about? Tell me.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so it was actually 6 years ago, 2014, at the end of the first set of goals, the Millennium Development Goals. And I think Annemarie can talk a bit more about that transition period. But I had previously worked on the Millennium Development Goals, but was somewhat frustrated with my co-founder, Richard Curtis, the film director, that they weren't well known enough. And so with the now Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, we came up with a plan that this time round with the new set of goals, we would try and make them famous because you can't fight for your rights unless you know what they are. And so we thought, first of all, when we were presented with 17, that's an unusual number. That's not a symmetrical number. This might be challenging. We need to go bright and colorful. And so we worked with a great designer. And after months of back and forth between the UN and this creative team, we came up with, I've rather strangely placed it, this badge, which I hope everyone receives one of these, and a colorful way of coding each of the goals so that each goal had its own color, its own number, its own icon. And within that, you could delve into the targets behind them. We felt it was important that everyone should know about the goals. That's why we're called Project Everyone. We wanted to get to the goals to every single person on the planet. We failed, by the way. It's still a big job to be done. But we reached about 3 billion people in that first year with the help of Beyonce and the UN's huge reach. So it was an extraordinary time.
So, Annemarie, I'll come back to you. Tell us why the order is important. Why is there was some unfinished business from the Millennium Development Goals? Is that why we've got hunger, poverty up at the start?
That's exactly it. It's really a continuation. Back in 2000, when the Millennium Development Goals were created, they were very much a snapshot of some of the top issues of our time. And there was a lot of progress, particularly around poverty, around health, but they weren't completed. There was still so much to do. And so that's why when you look at the goals in the first couple, start off with the continuation of the Millennium Development Goals to recognize the progress, but also to see that there's still a gap, and that's what we really need to work on. And I think 17 is it could have easily have been a different number, but at some point it was decided, and that's what's so great, is it was such a massive consultative process that everyone had a voice. Truly everyone could say what was really important to them, what was really interconnected, what do we need that goes with education, that goes with energy, that goes with life underwater. So the fact that it was a big consultative process that brought together all of these leaders who all said yes to them. And so really, truly, as Kate was saying, this is everyone's goals. This is the global goals. They're not just the UN, they are for everyone.
We like to say on the podcast that it's like the measuring stick that you as an individual can hold up to your government, to the company that you work for, because in fact, we've had most countries in the world sign up to say that they want to achieve these goals by 2030. We know that we're falling behind on quite a few of them, so we may come to that in a moment. But tell me, Stuart, why has Google.org gotten involved in the goals? Why do you feel that it's something that for Google is really important?
Yeah, thanks, Edie. And hello, folks. I think from our perspective, just kind of following up from the comments that Annemarie and Kate made there, that one of both the sort of blessings and the curses of the goals is they are so extraordinarily all-encompassing. If you're going to address every aspect in society and in life, the very feat of boiling that down to 17 is quite something. And for organizations, I think your ability to communicate work effectively and clearly, and actually whether that organization is the UN or it's Google or it's Project Everyone, is fundamentally important. So I suppose from a Google.org and Google perspective, just the ability to frame your work in a context that is relatable for communities, for citizens, for civic society is vital to make it relevant to them. When I think about, if you think about certainly as we do, I often joke when I'm speaking to colleagues at the UN, between the spaghetti of everything that Google does and the spaghetti of everything that the UN does, navigating that path is virtually impossible. And actually that framework, it's often called a blueprint, and we think of it as a sort of blueprint for solutions and a roadmap for solutions to tackle those problems. And so for us, a lot of that value is in the context setting and making sure that the work that we do is relevant and aligns with an overall objective.
So do you feel like the goals, when you start to work on one issue, you can see how they're connected to another? I mean, just to give an example, when we talk about the importance of climate change and trying to address climate change, what's really interesting in the podcast is that the stories quite very quickly get into issues around equity, get into issues around inequality, get into issues around women's rights, educating girls, and you wouldn't always put climate with, for example, educating girls. So I wonder, Stuart, just tell me a little more about how you see those intersections, because you scratch the surface of the goals and you see that they're all connected.
Yeah, it's very true. It's funny you should mention this, in that I've just in the last few days been discussing work with UN Women in relation to generation equality, the work that will mark the 25th, in fact, actually the 26th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, after it was postponed from this year due to COVID. And one of the things we've just been talking about is this: as soon as you deal with the top line issue around gender equality, you don't even scratch the surface before you find that intersectionality. And I think, again, that's very true of a lot of the work that we do. So again, I would sort of bring it back to saying, having to understanding that there is a framework and there is a lead message, and to stick on that example of around gender equality, some work that we've just done in the US with the National Domestic Workers Alliance is sort of typifies that, which is really a project around direct cash support for those impacted by COVID who are members of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. But then you very quickly get into issues relating to gender, in relation to race, and the disproportionate impact to those communities. So again, framing it at the top level in relation to the core issue that you're trying to address, but then understanding that intersectionality in itself is again vital, because COVID, of course, we can't have anything at the moment without talking about it in this context. It's the Gates Foundation, Melinda Gates, I think, is sort of very oft repeated already. 25 years of progress has been wiped out to some extent. Is that we've started to see that making progress collectively on these issues is more urgent than ever, and it's shone a light on disparity that many of us in our work would already have known about, but the broader awareness of that is vital in terms of tackling the issues and making more progress.
So, Kate, let's come to you. In fact, you're raising your hand, which is great. I'd love you to respond to that, and also tell me a little more about that video we saw just before the session started.
Yeah, sure. Well, and actually, that's a great segue in, because what I wanted to say was, I think COVID absolutely, as Stuart has pointed out, has set the goals back. There's no doubt about that. But what I think we're finding is, as this session is showing, is that within the goals, they do hold the answer. They hold the solutions to how we're going to build back in the most green, sustainable, equitable way. And I think it's fantastic that 193 countries 5 years ago agreed to this plan, because what they really need to do, from the political level to the business level to individual and community level, is to look back at the plan and say, here is the solutions to how we are going to solve this. And remember, there's a deadline with the goals. It's 2030. So we've got 10 years, we've got a decade of action that we need to really all play our part in. And I think that's what's so great about them. They're universal. They're interconnected, as you've talked about. So it's not just about global North supporting global South. It's about what happens in your home as well as overseas. They are interconnected, as we've discussed, and there is a deadline. And I think those things make it a brilliant rallying cry now more than ever as to how we're going to solve the problems we face as it is. And that was the reason why this group got together, led by the United Nations, to say in September 2020, how can we set that out to the world in a communicable way? And we agreed upon an idea called Nations United. Remember, 193 countries signed up. So every country has a role to play here. Nations United sets out the facts as they are now, and they're not great in not all places, but in many places. And then the solutions by which we can solve poverty, inequality, justice, climate change, and gender, and particularly the gender issue. And it's only 34 minutes, and it involves some of the biggest stars that support these issues, from Michelle Yeoh to Beyonce. Again, she's has an amazing performance at the end, and Tandy Newton, Malala, the Deputy Secretary General, the Secretary General themselves, all set out what we need to do to solve this. And I would love everyone to watch it if they haven't already. I'd love everyone to share it with their communities, well, with their employees. It's a great rallying cry, and it's only 34 minutes.
So that's a good call to action there. Annemarie, let's come back to you and tell me a little bit about what the danger is if we don't achieve the goals. How much are they going to cost? We know that we're facing the largest recession in 150 years. There's always gloom and doom, but give me a little reality check in terms of why it's so important.
I think we've already started to see why they're so important. If we had gotten a little bit further along on the Sustainable Development Goals, we would have been a little more resilient and shock-proof to some of these crises that come, such as COVID. I think what COVID has really done is open our eyes to the inequalities. I think sometimes people may have thought that, okay, the Sustainable Development Goals are really for this part of the world. What we've really seen is that inequality exists in every part of the world. And if anything, COVID has really shown that light on where those disparities are, where our systems are weak, where people are not getting access or being left behind. And that is the danger. It's so real. We can see it right now, what's happening. And that's why this whole acceleration is really needed. It's this fantastic blueprint. And what we really need to think about is how we scale up. Someone was just telling me that, for example, the vaccine for COVID, we want to make sure that everyone everywhere gets it at the same time, that there isn't a lag in access anywhere in the world. And there is currently a deficit of a gap of $28 billion, which sounds like a lot of money. But $28 billion is less than 2 days that we lose right now during COVID in tourism dollars. So really, it is a fantastic investment. The SDGs are all about investing in the current generation. It's also about investing in the future generation and making sure that we are not handing the next generation a very big debt and or a planet that's not in any way be able to be changed at some point. Time is ticking away, as Kate said, and every real moment does count. And we don't have that much time to get to where we need to be before the next shock comes.
So I think this decade of action that we talk about, the golden decade, as I've heard it referred to, needs to be a decade of real action. So Stuart, let's come back to you. Tell me a little more about how, if I'm an individual thinking about, okay, so I see these goals, there's really nothing I disagree with here, but how can I go about implementing them into my everyday life?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and Edie, and I'm gonna hand off very quickly, probably to Kate on this, actually, because I think there is. I'll give one sort of example. Is that one thing that we've wrestled with often in our discussions is around the importance of individual action. So, of course, it is vital that organizations like Google and lots of our peers around September time made commitments to net zero, to move to a position of carbon carbon neutrality, and to exclusively by 2030 to exclusively be using renewable sources of energy and not simply offsetting, as previous definitions have been. And those actions are important, but the role of individual actions is critical as well. I mean, I think right now, one of the, again, weird things about COVID is we often wrestle with this idea, but it's actually all about individual action at the moment. The way that we, whether we wear a mask or whether we wash our hands or how we behave is the thing that will literally save lives. And so we can see some of that. So one of the things that we've done in Google and worked very closely with the UN and the WHO especially is to make sure that we're an information platform, and there are dedicated sites, COVID sites on Google.com globally, which provide information that is being validated by the WHO. The data is all up to date, sort of sourced from Wikipedia and authoritative sources of information, tackling misinformation and so on. That is all vital, and that's the part that we've done. But actually, longer term, that role of individual action is going to become increasingly important. And COVID is a great example of how individuals can impact change, but I think we still have a long way to go on that. And again, I know this is an area that Kate and Annemarie and the UN are thinking about a lot, and are sort of starting to put our minds to.
So Kate, let's come to you. Tell me about individual action. What are the things that people can go away and start to do if they do care? And you can start with one goal. You can say, my favorite goal that I'm going to tackle is gender equality. So tell me how you get involved and what you can do.
Yeah. So the good news is there are many places now that you can go to, and you can start on the UN's global SDG site, Project Everyone's Global Goals site. They're very similar, and we sort of work together. Our Global Goals channels almost daily try and post something that helps people do when they say things like, what more can I do? I've seen this piece of content. I'm cross about this. This is not right. What more can I do? And I think on our Global Goals channels, you'll often find, whether it be on Goal 5, whether at the moment we have a campaign it is about Goal 5, but specifically about gender violence. Where can I go to take action? What can I do in my own life? What can I do to support an organization? So I think because there are so many actions you can take, each goal has its own set. If you go to globalgoals.org or the UN/SDG.org, you will find many ways of how you can take action. So I recommend that. I think we can do more. I think we can set it out clearer. But behind each goal, there are individual ways that you can do something in your home. You can change your behavior, or you can support an institution, or lobby your leader, talk to your leaders, talk to your employers about what more can be done.
So, in fact, you can also listen to the Global Goals Cast, because we still tell the stories of the champions making the world a better place and helping to achieve the global goals, just to give the podcast a plug. Annemarie, let's come to you, and you can listen to Annemarie and Kate on our latest episode, which is just out. Annemarie, let's come to you.
So I often, this Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, often says that she finds a docking station. So within the goals, so something that you care about, something that you'd like to learn more about, and think of it as a door. And so maybe it's zero hunger. That's something it's tangible, something that many of us know about, and so you open that door and quickly you realize that to care about zero hunger means you also care about education, because like 300 children get their meal, potentially their only meal, at school. So now kids are not in school because of COVID. So what is that doing? I think it gets people really thinking about solutions. And that's what we really need, is getting those solutions and scaling them up so that they reach people. And there's so many ideas, and there's probably, most people are working on a goal, whether they realize it or not. And I think it's just identifying and recognizing it and being intentional about where you're going to either be a voice or do action or advocate for or amplify something that you really believe in. And it's really this journey. It's a short journey of 9 years now, coming up in 2021, this decade of action. And so I think every minute counts at this point. Really, really, truly, every minute and every action does count. And as Stuart was saying, you can see the difference that an individual can make and a group of individuals.
Thank you guys so much for joining us for this short session, the SDGs 101, what they are and what you can do, and how you can identify what you're already doing with a sustainable development goal. So thank you to Stuart, Kate, and Annemarie, and that is all from us.
We can be.
We must be the first generation
to end extreme poverty.
The generation
most determined
to fight injustice
and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done. The global goals.
A 15-year plan
For everyone. Everywhere.
With no one left behind.
We will live in a world
where nobody
anywhere lives in extreme poverty.
Where no one
goes hungry.
Where no one
wakes in the morning
asking if there will be food today.
We will live in a world where no child has to die
of diseases we know how to cure, and where proper health care
is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world
where everyone
goes to school, and education gives us the knowledge
and skills
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities
to thrive
and be powerful
and safe.
We cannot succeed if half the world is held back.
We will live in a world
where all people can get clean water
and proper toilets
at home,
at school, and at work.
We will live in a world where
there's sustainable energy for everyone.
Heat, light,
and power for the whole planet.
Without destroying the planet.
We will live in a world where economies prosper.
And new wealth
leads to decent jobs
for everyone.
And we will live in a world
where our industry,
our infrastructure, and our
best innovations
are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
We will live in a world
where prejudices and extremes of inequality
are defeated.
Inside our countries
and between different countries.
Where people live in cities and communities
that are safe, progressive,
and support everyone who lives there.
Where we replace
what we consume. Planet where we put back what we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back the threat of climate
change.
Where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas.
restore, and protect
life on land,
The forests,
Animals, the earth itself.
with peace between and inside countries.
Where all governments are open.
And answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
Under justice rules.
With everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people
Work together.
in partnerships of all kinds
To make these goals a reality.
For everyone, everywhere.
These are the United Nations Global Goals
for sustainable development.
Let's get to work. Let's make it happen.
This is one of the most important sessions on the Hispanic Leadership Summit. You have been all exposed to what is the global plan, what are the Sustainable Development Goals. This session will actually talk about the why. Why does it matter? And why does it matter for us, the Hispanic community, to get into the Sustainable Development Goals as a way to actually advance our agenda? But also, why is it important for the Sustainable Development Goals to tap and to get communities like ours to push so that we can deliver on the plan that we have? So if you don't mind, I would like to ask these three experts here about your opinion about why this is relevant. I would like to start with Ambassador Juan José Gómez Camacho. You were instrumental in helping Mexico as a country not only negotiate the Sustainable Development Goals, but also implement them and adapt them at the country level. And that was a hard exercise because you had to adjust national priorities and then put them with global. But at the end of the day, what can we learn as a Hispanic community about that? And why do you think what we're trying to do is relevant for the Hispanic community?
Gracias, Claudia. Let me approach it in two ways, especially as you ask for the Hispanic community in the US more than the experience in Mexico, but using that experience. I think first what it needs to be understood is that traditionally the notion of development, sustainability, prosperity, etc., it was perceived only as a poor country challenge, not a wealthier, richer country as a US problem. If any, the whole thing was, let's help the poor. That was the logic in the past. And what the Sustainable Development Goals do is to make us all understand that we all human beings are on the same boat, that inequality is not a problem only for the poor countries, but also for the rich, that challenges of labor, quality of labor, is not only a problem of the poor, but also of the wealthier countries, that climate change and environmental challenges are not only, again, challenges of poorer countries, but also the wealthier countries. This is to say, first, that the SDGs, the 17 goals, are as applicable to the US as they are to Mexico or any other country in the planet. If a country, if a society want to build prosperity, they need to work on the SDGs, because the SDGs is not only a bureaucratic UN-led program of action. It's a deeper understanding of what we need as human beings, as communities, to live or to lead in the future healthier, more robust lives. And the Hispanic community in the US is not an exception. In fact, it is a good example of what the SDGs can do for a community. And I would say here that, as you have said it before, and in our conversations we have talked about, we have a very robust community in the US. The Hispanics in the US are a very robust group of people, diverse, hardworking, but not necessarily well-connected. You still see that some cohesion or coherence around them is missing. And I think the SDGs could do a lot for that. Second, this diverse Hispanic community in the US have or belong or have action throughout the social, let's call it, map of the US. You have hardworking people unskilled, you have hardworking people skilled, and you have also in the upper levels, investors, managers, people working in the corporate world. All of them together have to play a role. It's really crucial. Those that employ, for example, Hispanics leading companies, they have to play a role and to understand this for the simple reason that the SDGs is not only about government doing this or that. It's also about companies doing this or that. It's about companies developing sustainable business models, not as a charity, but transforming their business model from within. And if they are Hispanic, if they have Hispanics leaders or Hispanics employees, this would be very critical. And third, allow me to say this. The Hispanics following the SDGs not only will contribute to their own communities, wherever they are in the US as Hispanics, not only will they help to improve their quality of life or their living standards, but also equally important, and is not often or often not said or never said, is how much can they contribute to the US as a country. If the US, as rich and important as it is, wants to continue being what it is, and even better and greater, wealthier, with less inequality, with less social challenges, they will need also the Hispanic community contributing with the SDGs. And this is extremely important. So the Hispanic community can contribute, A, to improve their quality of life themselves as a community, B, can be or become a great contributor to the US as a whole to improve its living standards nationally.
Thank you so much, John. You know, like you've seen it all. You're one of the most fervent advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals, sustainability, working for Brookings Institutes and the 20 other hats that you wear. The Hispanic community is massive, as Ambassador Camacho said, but we also face incredible barriers and gaps that are really stopping us from accessing the potential, the power that we have. In your experience, seeing this and seeing it all across the world, and knowing that we as a Hispanic community, we have barriers, we have massive potential, but we don't have a plan. Why do you think this is relevant? Why do you think you're doing the exercise that we're doing of seeing the SDGs through the Hispanic lens and converting it to the HSDGs matters?
Muchas gracias, Claudia. Thank you so much. I think it's exactly as the ambassador was saying, that there's so many perspectives and so many different walks of life that people bring to these issues. The SDGs or the HSDGs might not be terms that people are used to talking about, but they're issues that people already care about. And when I go around to talking to communities and groups all around the world, I like to ask people at the very beginning, what's the biggest issue that you think is the single biggest thing that your community needs to solve or the world needs to solve? And if you have 20 different people in a room, you'll get pretty much 20 different answers, because everyone sees something as the most important, whether that's tackling hunger or tackling climate change or jobs or gender equality. And the reality is each of them is right. And so what these goals are ultimately is a way to get everyone on the same page, literally and figuratively, about what they're trying to solve, and to remove the sense of competition of, is it gender equality or jobs or climate? That's a silly question. It's all the above. And so we need to have ways for people to connect, because these issues are also interconnected in practice. And if we've seen one thing in the world this year, it's that our issues of environment and health and jobs and inequality and exclusion are deeply interconnected all around the world. So these goals allow us to get specific about that. And if we get everyone on the same page, literally and figuratively, then we can start to look at, like you and your team have done, well, where are we doing better? Where are we doing worse? Where do we really need to double down our efforts? And we can start to be more specific about how all of us need to be solving these problems in parallel and in concert, and have a common scorecard for how we're doing. So ultimately, I think of these sustainable development goals as two things. One is they're often described as what the world or the UN told the world to care about. I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's issues that the world told the UN not to forget about. And it's the diplomats like the ambassador that pulled it all together onto the same page so we all have the same scorecard. But then the second thing is it allows us to get specific. What do we mean by challenges? What do we mean by the economic, the social, the environmental? And to keep track of that common scorecard so that we can say, we need to do better here. Let's work together to figure that out.
Yeah, and there's also a sense. I think that there's also a sense. If I would ask Hispanic leaders all across, John, I would say that not everybody is as familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. And being an advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals, you want groups like Hispanics that we're so massive in power that we don't really recognize how important we are to global affairs, like a global framework like that, to advance it. So I think it is a point that I would like to make later. Beth, Katie, the chair of our advisory board, the person that keeps us straight and on strategy. Thank you so much for everything what you do, Beth, for us at the World Human Foundation. I'm here to ask you something else, though. Instead of singing your praises, I'm here to ask you, in your experience in corporate America and running foundations yourself, why is this relevant? And why, aligning the SDG, like Hispanics aligning with the SDGs, will make it easier to get corporate funding, to measure, like what John said, the scorecard that you've been so advocate saying, like measuring is a mess, and having, like a set of common scorecards, and also, like running a charity. You had a lot of experience of dealing with these issues, and how does that help us?
Yeah, well, thank you, Claudia, and it's a pleasure to be here. In such great company, talking about something that I'm really passionate about, as you know, which is the Sustainable Development Goals and how they can help the world focus on those things that are most important to having a healthy globe. So, coming from the perspective of corporate America, and for all of you out there, I've been in corporate America 25 plus years and running businesses and such. I've also worn the hat, as Claudia mentioned, of actually running a foundation, being on boards of nonprofit organizations, and of course, working closely with Claudia and the We Are Human Foundation. And the one thing that I can tell you is that the true practical answer is corporate America has to care about this, because their very livelihood is connected to the health of our country. And the health of our country is connected to the people in the country. So the Hispanics are a huge customer of companies. They're a huge employee base of companies. They are a part of our fabric, and we will, as a country, will not survive unless we have all of our people healthy and all of our people with equal opportunity. So corporate America needs to care about this, because the bottom line is the bottom line. They aren't going to be able to survive and be profitable and be successful if they aren't embracing all of the people in this country. The problem has been, and why I'm such a fan of the Sustainable Development Goals, is because corporate America looks out like everyone else and says, wow, where do we start? And so the SDGs do a wonderful job of laying out the framework of where the problem is, so that corporate America can say, hey, if I'm, a company, I work for General Mills, we really understand food, and we understand food systems, and we understand the issue of hunger. This is a place we can help. And corporate America is increasingly recognizing that it's not just about giving money out, which, by the way, is incredibly important, but it's also about becoming part of the problem-solving network. So it's not just about giving money to organizations to say, you go solve this problem, but corporate America needs to, and increasingly is, collaborating with nonprofits and foundations and government entities to be able to help solve the problems. And one of the things I always said when I was working at Principal and the foundation reported into me is we really want to find those things that are not just a handout, but a hand up. We want to help people get to a place where they can then help themselves and help others around them. So, you know, corporate America increasingly is, but still isn't doing enough to be able to collaborate to solve these problems. And it really does start with, you know, who are the people in our country that need the help the most? And Claudia, you know, the facts are there. I mean, the disproportionate effect of COVID on minorities, particularly Hispanics, and the disproportionate effect of just the social injustice that's going on is also with minorities and Hispanics. So that's a place to start.
And so you think, Beth, that by us having a version of the SDGs seen through the lenses of Hispanics is going to help us to connect better with corporate America and with the efforts to achieve the SDGs. Is that right?
Absolutely, because corporate America is looking for, you know, helping them identify what the problem is, right? You can't solve a problem until you're clear on what the problem is. So what you're doing with this connecting the Hispanic agenda with the SDGs is you're saying through the SDG lens, let's look at where we have some real opportunities to make a difference. And corporate America is all about, you know, helping them figure out where to focus. And then the other thing is that there's measurable impact that can be made. And corporate America is about, okay, I want to help support this, but I also want to know that I'm making an impact and that we're somehow measuring the results of what we're trying to do. So absolutely, I think it's a really great way to communicate with corporate America about how they can make a difference.
So you all said this is a great way to get specific, to have a common scorecard, to unify, to identify the problems, to align, to make it easier, and have it as a framework. We are embarking in understanding where do we stand as a community within the SDGs. We are seeing the heat map. We know where we're going to be presenting now. What are the red zones? What are the red flags? What are the orange? Where are we green? And where do we actually connect that? You are all experts on this. What are your advice? What else? What is your advice for us as a community? The leaders of the Hispanic community are listening to you now. What is your advice? What can you tell? What are the do's and don'ts? What are the best practices? What's next? How can we take it forward and really make it meaningful for us to advance our community using a framework and measuring mechanism as well? But also, how do we actually help the SDGs get advanced by being an open minority that is taking this forward? John.
What a great question. I think there are probably a few things that I'd suggest, but curious what others' views are. I think, you know, at the first point, you know, getting people's voice together, as you say, matters hugely. So, you know, just like we're seeing so many business leaders across the country and around the world start to speak up on, you know, stakeholder capitalism, the need for broader understanding of the responsibilities of companies, not just in the important work of philanthropy, but also in their core business practices. What are the problems our products and services are solving? This is huge. And when business leaders speak up, for example, to say this matters, a lot of policymakers and politicians tend to listen too. So it's not just about what gets said, but it's also about what gets heard and sending the signals that this is important and these are problems that need to get solved. A second thing I'd say, though, is really this focus on getting specific. If there's a through line that the diplomats really said over and over again in firming up this agenda, it's leave no one behind. And I think that's a central aspect of our political conversation right now, but it has to get specific about specific people getting left behind with specific problems in specific places. And so when we look at a very diverse community, like the Hispanic community across the country, we need to be understanding what are the specific challenges in each community that even individual households are facing. And in a data-rich world, we can get pretty practical about that too. So we don't have to do all big hand-waving about great issues and great megatrends. We can get very specific about the places and people where they live and what they're confronting and what kind of support they might need. But then the third thing I would say is we can introduce a bit of healthy competition around unsolved problems. So there are some of these things that are probably a little more off the shelf that we could be tackling, things like social protection, unemployment insurance, things that we know how to do and we're seeing very quickly being rolled out amid the crisis right now. There are a bunch of things that are harder to solve. How do we transition to a zero carbon emissions economy? How do we really tackle the healthy diets question and the child obesity challenge around the world? These are unsolved problems where, in my view, one of the things we can do, and in my home country of Canada, I've really advocated this, is we could have each community experimenting with its own approaches and say, look, we've got a breakthrough here. And if everyone's tracking these same indicators on these unsolved problems, we can learn from each other to see, look at what they tried there and look at what they tried here. And if we put those two things together, that's where the magic happens. So I think we can start to really make this a community-based approach. We can use words and language that fit and are relevant to each community to bring these issues to life. But we can do it in a way that's kind of generating new approaches rather than expecting it to all be just, someone else's business or, press a lever and it'll happen. It's often going to be quite the opposite.
Thank you. Yes, I Beth, please. But okay. Let me just say, because it's like burning, and otherwise I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight because I didn't say. It is critical to understand that all the issues are interconnected, but at the same time, understanding what are the interventions that you have to apply first, depending on how transformational they can be. That's how the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria came up, saying those are the three things that really are interventions that can be transformational for health altogether, because you can isolate them and achieve them faster. It doesn't mean that you're not going to do the rest, but you're going to do that first. Beth.
Yeah, first of all, I think everything you said, John, is dead on. One thing that I think that, and I'll put on my, having sat on the side of being a funder, giving funds out as a foundation, one of the things that I think that was showing to be very effective was kind of what you were saying, which is that you need to get communities involved. This cannot be about, some large organization, whether it be a government organization or even a nonprofit or a corporation coming in and sort of, doing a wide swath of here's some money, go do something. You got to get communities involved. And one of the organizations that I'm currently involved in is really about solving problems at the grassroots level, which says, if it's education, you've got to get the schools, the teachers, the parents, the community all working hard. And education is an important one. And in this particular foundation called Action for Healthy Kids, the reality is that the most in need are your minority populations, and Hispanics are at the top of that list. And so solving these problems is about having the conversation. So the work that you do, Claudia, is incredibly important. There's programming out there that is about, helping to connect people to food if they have a hunger issue, or connecting them to, financial experts that can help them with their financial life. But there's another huge need, which is oftentimes not recognized enough, which is this advocacy of bringing the issue alive and making sure that people are aware of it. So, I would say continue down that path, because I've been on this journey with you now for 2 years, and the difference between 2 years ago and now for just having the conversations has been huge. All of a sudden, it's become much more on people's radar. And that's because of the advocacy side of things. So there's the programming side, there's the everybody involved side, and then there's the continued conversations around advocating for finding solutions.
Ambassador, your advice.
I of course agree with everything that has been said. And let me start from something John mentioned, which I agree, and you too. To give you my observation on this. it is true that the SDGs make no sense on their own. None of the 17 makes sense alone. The whole concept and construction of SDGs as a way to ensure longer-term prosperity for all is precisely to keep them connected, because they interact with each other. They reinforce each other and they allow others to be materialized or to be realized. Now, what you said is critical. That doesn't mean that we all have the same challenges as a country and as a community. So first point here is that the work you are doing in mapping, in having a sort of radiography of what are the specific challenges of this super diverse large community in the US, which are Hispanics, within the framework of SDGs is critical. So yes, they all are together. We need them all. But what are the challenges for Hispanics? Labor, inequality, gender, health, immigration. Let's see, and you will find out. This is critical. Second, the SDGs implementation or materialization in the future is a combination, is very structural. The change is structural. So it's a combination of many actors. One has to do, of course, with the society itself, and I will explain on the Hispanics. But it's very much about governments and public policy, changing or developing public policy that tries to precisely materialize or to implement the SDGs. And it's, of course, about larger institutions and private sector, as Beth explained. Something we realized both in Mexico and globally when doing this is that at the end of the day, the sole guarantor that all this will happen, meaning companies will change and develop sustainable business models, and governments will develop and deploy the right public policy towards implementing the SDGs, is when the society is aligned behind them. This is what is very critical. And let's come back to the Hispanics. That's exactly what the Hispanics can do, to align themselves, what are their challenges around the SDGs, and make sure that not only themselves, but the other great and even more important actors or players on this, meaning the private sector, and very much so the political level, governments, federal governments, state governments, municipal governments, etc., are also pursuing these new policies. And on this, let me give you a couple of ideas that I think, or suggestions that I think would be critical. We also realized, and this I believe it, the SDGs is not only about all what I have said, policies, changing of this or changing of that, but most importantly is a way of think. It's a change of mindset. And this new mindset has to happen in the people. We focused, we tried to do it in Mexico and many other countries the same, because of this realization to work with the youth. Prepare the youth, teach the youth, teach young Hispanics in primary school, in high school, secondary, wherever they are, this new way of thinking. These notions of sustainability have to be in their DNA, because this is what is going to make sure or to ensure something critical here, which is change of behavior. This is what the SDGs are. A change of behavior, a change of attitude, a change of mindset. From this change of mindset, change of policy comes. Change of business models also happens. This is critical, so the youth, education, make sure that the next generations will be these guarantors of this change. And on the same lines, women, Claudia. Women are massive agents of transformation. And I think in this mapping that you are doing, in this work you are doing with the Hispanic community in the US, which is large, which is amorphous, but is very robust, women have to play an incredible role. First, creating equality, reducing the inequality, gender inequality, which is dramatic everywhere in the world. The Hispanic community, not only we do right in trying to reduce that, which is a central point of the SDGs, but the community as such doing this will empower itself as well. And I conclude with what I said before. The Hispanic community is not only a force to change itself, it's a force to keep changing for good the US as a whole. And this is something that in the US has to be seen, has to be recognized, and has to be garnered, because I think the power there is enormous.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of young people. As a fact, we're the largest youth group in America, and Latinas are actually surpassing Latinos. So we have a lot of that and a lot of issues to solve, but a lot of, we're at time. I want to thank you so very much for helping frame this conversation. I just want to finish with literally a 3-word final word of encouragement for all of us. For many of the Latino community, this is brand new. And for many people, this is scary and maybe feels futile. So if you don't mind, just like give it a 3-word encouragement, ending with, yes, can we count on you moving forward in this journey that we're going to take? I'm going to start with Beth Brady, please.
Well, I think 3 words, huh? Learn and get involved.
Ambassador.
Learn and get involved.
Your mindset.
John.
Dedication drives breakthroughs.
Right. And I think that I'm going to take it that yes, we can count on you in the journey that we have. Yes, you think this is a good idea, so let's get going. I cannot be more grateful. Beth, John, and Ambassador Camacho, thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Howard, the Director of Operations for We Are All Human. I'm excited to be the one that gets to tell you about the research that we've been working on in partnership with the Hispanic Star Alliance, some key international and national data and research partners, and our team at We Are All Human, who's been working very hard to gather what the Hispanic community looks like when mapped within the Sustainable Development Goals. As you heard from the incredible experts that have spoken before me, countries have taken these 17 goals, their many targets and indicators, and seen where they measure so that they can track progress towards advancing the future of the people and their planet. As the Hispanic community represents economically the equivalent of the 8th largest country in the world, we decided to take on the challenge of trying to do the same and map the Hispanic community within these goals, within the targets and the indicators, to see where there are gaps, opportunities, red flags, and more. First, to get started, a little bit of background on the methodology we used to put this mapping together. As a first step, we reviewed all of the 17 goals, all of the targets, and all of the indicators to identify the ones that were actually relevant for the Hispanic community. For example, Goal 14 is life underwater, and the Hispanic community aren't fish, so it didn't really seem applicable to dive into that area too much. However, after going through all of them and identifying the ones we should look for, we then went through and all the data and research that we could find with the many partners I previously mentioned to see how on a global, national, within the US, and then within the Hispanic community, we measure up against these goals, targets, and indicators. To build the narrative, we first looked for the data at the global level, then for the data within the United States, and then for the data specific to the Hispanic community to see how they compare to one another. By looking at the comparisons between the global and national data, we were able to understand trends and gain insights for where the Hispanic community truly mapped. We were able to take this data and put it into a map where we broke the indicators for the Hispanic community into 5 different groups. The first group was where the Hispanic community was performing below the national average. The second group is where it was performing above the national average. The third group is where they're trending up, however, they still fall below the national average. The fourth group is where we hadn't been able to find any data, and the fifth group is where it was not applicable. Finally, by reviewing this map, we were able to prioritize which SDGs were most relevant for the Hispanic community based on where we saw the most red. As we like to say, what gets measured gets done. Here is a picture of the mapping that I just referenced. Based on the 5 different groups, we have them color-coded to make it easier for you. So the group 1, where the Hispanic community performed below the national average, you can see those in red. Where they performed above, you can see those in green. The ones in yellow are where they are trending upwards, however, still fall below the national average. The white ones are where we're missing data and would love your help to find it, and the gray ones are the non-applicable indicators. Furthermore, we were able to look into this data and draw some key insights that we wanted to share. The first one being, the US generally is measuring above the global level in terms of these indicators. However, it's the minority communities within the US that are often left behind and unable to catch up. As we heard earlier, COVID has impacted every single one of the Sustainable Development Goals. Unfortunately, the developing countries and minorities within developed countries are those who are most disproportionately affected. Despite being left behind in the US Hispanics actually are faring better than Hispanics in Latin America generally. US Hispanics are above average in 9 of the indicators, however, they're below average in 36. These 36 indicators are targeted within 8 SDGs. I'm going to dive a little bit into each one of those to give you a better sense. First, for Goal 1, no poverty. 16% of US Hispanics live in poverty compared to 10% of non-Hispanic whites. The home ownership rate for Hispanics is 47% as compared to 70% for non-Hispanic whites. 28% of the poor population in the United States is Hispanic, despite representing 18% of the total population. For Goal 2, zero hunger, Hispanic children are twice as likely to lack access to nutritious food than non-Hispanic white children. Also, when compared to the national average, there's a 50% higher rate of food insecurity for the Hispanic community. For Goal 3, good health and well-being, 20% of Hispanics under 65 are without health insurance. Compared to non-Hispanic whites, Hispanics are 9 times more likely to get tuberculosis and have a 50% higher death rate from diabetes. Only 33% of Hispanics with mental health issues receive help. Vaccine administration for the Hispanic community dropped 50% for measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, and HPV. Goal 4, quality education. Only 34% of Hispanics from 3 to 5 years old enroll in preschool, which is 10 points below the national average. Hispanic enrollment in elementary schools is half that of white students. There is an 8-point gap in high school completion rate for Hispanics as compared to the national average. College completion rate for Hispanics is 49% as compared to 70% for Asian and 67% for white. 25% of Latinas have a bachelor's degree, which is above Latinos, which is only 16%, as compared to 40% for white women. For Goal 5, gender equality, 1 in 3 Latinas suffer from physical violence or stalking. Latinas, on average, spend 7.2 hours in unpaid domestic care or household work. For every 100 men that are promoted into managerial positions, only 68 Latinas are. Within the Hispanic community, only 48% of domestic abuse cases go reported, as compared to 70% for non-Hispanic white. Latinas make only 53 cents to the dollar for every white man. Latinas represent only 3% of senior level positions. For Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, on the positive side, Hispanic GDP grew at a rate 4 times faster than the US overall. Additionally, Hispanics are incredibly entrepreneurial. As I know well from my friends Mark Madrid and Victor Arias, Hispanic business owners grew 34% over the last 10 years, as compared to just 1% for non-Hispanics. Fortunately, for some not so positive targets, Hispanic GDP per employed person is just $85,000 as compared to $128,000 as the national average. 1 in 4 of the so-called NEET, not employed or learning, are Hispanics. At its peak, unemployment for Hispanics was 17.6%, as compared to 12.4% for whites. Latinas' unemployment is the highest among all groups at 19%. While we can look at each of these goals one at a time, it's also too important to remember that all of them are interconnected. By impacting one, you impact many. For example, with these interconnections, there's some enablers of decent work. For example, less poverty and hunger leads to more access to education, and with more education, there's more access to higher wages. Furthermore, there's a domino effect we see here. With more education, there's a reduction in violence against women. At the same time, decent work also supports reduction in inequalities and peace and justice. At the same time, decent work also has an impact on reduced inequalities and peace and justice with the increase in representation over time. Additionally, access to clean energy helps households save money on utility bills. Finally, but equally as important, decent work has a transgenerational impact. By having access to a job, it makes them less poor and gives a better starting point for their children. Within decent work, we're also seeing some trends. The first trend is with young Hispanics. While their educational attainment is improving, it's important that we increase the percentage of Hispanics that achieve bachelor's degrees. And secondly, for young adults, there's a large number of Hispanics in low-wage jobs. It's important for us to improve their skills and move them into positions with proven opportunities. As you can see, all of our problems are interconnected. The more we understand our problems, the better our solutions will be. Now it's my pleasure to take us into another conversation where we'll dive deeper into some of these trends that we saw and really prioritize what the best actions will be to advance the community the fastest.